Trivium. Not only are they one of the best-selling heavy metal bands of the 21st century, they also happen to be my personal favorite group. They were my first tattoo. See right here. I've seen them live on multiple occasions, and those of you who remember back when I did cover videos will know that I dedicated multiple videos just to them. Not only are they one of the best-selling bands, but they're also one of the most prolific bands of this millennium, putting out 10 albums. Even more impressive is that none of these albums sound exactly like the one that came before it. Such a discography can obviously be a little intimidating, and that's why for this video, I'm going to be going over each album and explaining what I personally like about them. This is Beginner's Guide to Trivium. In 1999, Orlando, Florida, a 13-year-old Matt Heafy performed a guitar cover of Metallica's No Leaf Clover at his 8th grade talent show. In the audience was a Mr. Brad Luder, who invited Heafy to join his high school band. Heafy later described being intimidated by the other members, who are all several years older than him and looked down on him pretty intensely. However, after he mastered his tryout song, For Whom the Bell Tolls by Metallica, they all respected him and accepted him into the group. This band was named Trivium. The word trivium traditionally refers to the lower tier of the 7 classic liberal arts, which consists of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. This is in contrast with the upper division, the quadrivium, which consists of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astrology. Luder supposedly envisioned this name as symbolizing the band's 3-way combination of metalcore, melodic death metal, and thrash metal. For those of you watching who don't know what any of those genres are, don't worry, you don't need to. All you need to know is that Trivium sound has traditionally been built on punchy, heavy, but melodic riffs, and a mixture of clean and screamed vocals. Heafy originally joined the band just as a guitar player. However, shortly after doing so, Luder quit the group over stylistic differences, and Heafy was forced to take over singing. The band shuffled through members for a bit before settling on a 3-piece lineup of Heafy on guitar and vocals, Brent Young on bass, and Travis Smith on drums. With this lineup, they put out the demos Ruber and Karelius, respectively referred to as the red and blue demos. These demos caught the attention of German indie label Life Force Records, who signed the group. In 2003, Trivium put out their debut album, Ember to Inferno. Ember to Inferno is honestly kind of tricky for me to talk about. That's not a bad thing in any way. In fact, I do consider this a really enjoyable record to listen to. I just don't really have a great deal to say about it. I'll start by saying the good things. As I said, this is by all means a good album. It's probably the best Trivium could have done at recording a debut album, considering that their chief songwriter, Heafy, was only 17 years old, which means that most of the songs were probably written when he was even younger than that. As far as specific songs go, I feel like the title track is the best representative of Trivium's sound at this time, and When All Light Dies is another one that I particularly like. Neither of these, however, stand up to the opening track, Pillars of Serpents, an absolutely crushing song that perfectly sets the tone for the album, and is still generally considered its standout track. With all that having been said, the album's main drawback is that it's just not incredibly memorable. As I already said, Heafy certainly does a great job given he was still a legal minor. It's pretty clear he had a lot of growing up to do, songwriting-wise. This is definitely a good album, but in all honesty, it'll be of most interest to established fans who are curious and want to check out Trivium's Square One. Shortly after the album's release, Trivium became a 4-piece with the addition of Maine native Corey Beaulieu on lead guitar. Shortly after that, Brent Young departed the band and was replaced by Paolo Gregoletto. With these new members, the band signed to major label Roadrunner Records. I'm not usually a big fan of Roadrunner because, well, if a record label has a whole page dedicated to it called Criticisms of Roadrunner Records, that's not usually a good sign. That being said, their iffy practices definitely didn't hurt Trivium, as they went on to release their second album, Ascendancy, in 2005. And boy, do I have a lot to say about this album. When I was first writing this video, it was originally going to be a ranking of Trivium's albums. I eventually decided against that, since a video of that type would only really be of interest to established Trivium fans, whereas a beginner's guide video could appeal to many more people. Why am I mentioning this? Well, because if I went ahead and did the ranking video, then Ascendancy would be number 1. Somehow, some way, on just their second album, Trivium managed to set a standard of excellence that they still haven't reached. The main thing that makes this album great is that there isn't a single filler track. Every song comes out guns blazing, firing on all cylinders. Even the instrumental introduction track, End of Everything, does a great job at setting atmosphere. The album's first proper song, Rain, sets the tone perfectly with a fast, pounding, head-banging guitar riff paired with heafy's screaming vocals. Later on we get a heavy breakdown riff paired with a sick lead guitar line from Corey. The song that follows this, Pull Harder on the Strings of Your Martyr, was the first Trivium song that made me think, wow, this band is good. Travis Smith starts things off with a killer drum intro, and we later get one of the most irresistibly head-banging riffs that they've ever written. For a while, this was a song they would always close their shows with, and I can definitely see why. Dying in Your Arms is the most radio-friendly song on the album. It's still the most listened to song on the album on Spotify, and even if it is a little cheesy with its predominantly sung vocals and kind of simplistic song structure, I still think it's pretty good. Finally, the album closer, Declaration, is a track that I feel doesn't get as much respect as it should. At 7 minutes long, it's the most compositionally complex song on the album. It starts off with a basic verse-chorus structure, then it goes into multiple different sections where Trivium really do flex their songwriting muscles. This album is what put Trivium on the heavy metal radar. It sold over 500,000 copies worldwide, was named Album of the Year by Kerrang! Magazine, and would later be declared the 11th best metal album of the 21st century by Metal Hammer. Shortly after releasing this album, Trivium would also go on to play the main stage at Download Festival in the UK, which really solidified their status as an established band in the heavy metal scene. It was only a year and a half before they would release their follow-up, 2006's The Crusade. Making a proper follow-up to Ascendancy was always going to be difficult. Trivium decided that the best route to go was to make an album incomparable to Ascendancy in terms of sound. They largely ditched screaming vocals and went for a more straightforward thrash metal sound. The result is... Look, I want to say that this is by no means a bad album. Really, I don't think Trivium are capable of making one. However, it's the album that you could say is their worst, and the least amount of fans would disagree with you. The big problem with this album is that it sounds kind of stale, for a lack of a better word. By largely dispensing with screaming vocals, Trivium did away with a pretty big part of their sound, and as a result, this album sounds like a lot of bands could have written it. The main critique that gets repeated is that this sounds too much like Metallica, and while I don't 100% agree, I can see where people are coming from when they say that. This album also features The Rising, which Trivium have mentioned in interviews as being the least favorite song they've ever written. Okay, I've harshed on this album long enough. I do like straightforward thrash metal, and this album definitely has a few standout moments. Anthem, We Are the Fire, is one of the cheesiest tracks on the record, but it has infectious, fist-pumping energy, a powerful gang vocal section, and I can't help but just love it. And Sadness Will Sear is Trivium's attempt at writing a ballad. The song is written about the real-life case of Matthew Shepard, a gay man who was beaten to death in a homophobic hate crime. The song is powerful without being too preachy, and it doesn't hurt that the riffs are absolutely killer. The 8-minute title track that closes the album is an instrumental that consists of Matt and Corey trading off, showing their chops on guitar. Songs like this can easily sound a little too bloated, but this song just works. My personal favorite song, Becoming the Dragon, is one of the few tracks that has screamed vocals, and they really do make it pop. Not only that, but it also features a bass solo from Paolo, which is a really great addition. Give some more respect to the bass players, yo. For what it's worth, the album bonus track, Broken One, is, in my opinion, the best bonus track that Trivium have ever written, and it was originally going to be on the album before they decided to put The Rising on last minute. Safe to say they made the wrong choice there. Honestly, it says a lot that even Trivium's worst album has quite a few good moments. It wouldn't be until 2008 that they began work on a follow-up, but a new album, they decided not to work with Jason Sukoff, who had produced all of their albums up until that point, and they decided to instead do work with Nick Raskulinecz, who had previously done work for Foo Fighters, Rush, and Coheed and Cambria. With his assistance, the band would write, record, and release Shogun. I'm going to take a brief detour from the musical talk to discuss the historical context behind the title, Shogun. I don't need to, but I want to. As you can probably tell from the album cover, the name, Shogun, is of Japanese origin. Starting in 1185, Japanese emperors held very little real power, and the country was de facto ruled by military leaders referred to as shoguns. Different clans held power over the next 7 centuries, with each of them establishing a new dynasty, referred to as a shogunate. The era of the shoguns ended when the Tokugawa shogunate was overthrown by Emperor Meiji in 1868. In case you couldn't tell, I'm a history major. It should also be noted that Matt himself is half Japanese, which makes the fixation on Japanese history a little more understandable. Although those of you who have seen my Alcest video will know that white people writing albums about Japan isn't inherently a bad thing. As for the actual music itself, holy cow did Trivium atone for the Crusade. I mentioned earlier how widely loved Ascendancy is amongst the fandom. Well, Shogun is the one other album that's commonly discussed as possibly being their best. In my personal opinion, while Ascendancy is the best listening experience, Shogun is Trivium at the peak of their musical prowess, as far as writing technically complex riffs. Think Ascendancy, but if the band had taken a whole year of university-level guitar courses before recording it. This album also uses 7-string guitars exclusively, which really adds to the complexity. This is a very interesting album not only musically, but lyrically as well. While The Crusade had some songs written about real-life murders, Trivium's lyrics had largely been centered around broad themes of inner struggle and overcoming adversity. On Shogun, the lyrics feel a bit more focused, covering many different topics. The opening track, Kirasut Gomen, is a Japanese phrase that literally translates to permission to cut and leave. It refers to an ancient practice of self-defense where samurai had permission to kill anyone of a lower class who attacked their honor. Down from the Sky is a song about potential nuclear apocalypse, while also criticizing those who profit off of war. Into the Mouth of Hell We March and Torn Between Scylla and Charybdis are both about the legend of the sailor Odysseus having to choose between facing the giant whirlpool, Scylla, or the 6-headed monster, Charybdis. He who spawned the Furies is about the god Uranus being castrated by his son, the titan Kronos, thus spawning forth Aphrodite and Erinyes, while Kronos would go on to devour his own sons, because of course he did. Of Prometheus and a Crucifix discusses the titan Prometheus having his liver torn out on a daily basis and comparing his suffering to that of Jesus on the cross. Finally, like Callisto to A Star in Heaven, talks about the nymph Callisto being raped by Zeus, and subsequently being transformed into a bear, and finally being turned into the Ursa Major constellation. Sorry, filming this in one take, my throat's taken a lot of abuse. As for which songs I personally think are best, Down From the Sky was actually the first Trivium song I ever heard. Not to mention the first song I ever learned how to play on 5-string bass. So it's obviously very near and dear to me. Into the Mouth of Hell We March is an anthemic, powerful song that features 2 of the most insane solos Matt and Corey have ever written. Torn Between Scylla and Charybdis has an opening riff that just makes you want to headbang, not to mention one of the most difficult to play riffs on the album, as well as not 1, but 2 bass solos. Finally, Throes of Perdition has a sick opening guitar riff that was actually written by Paolo, the bass player, and it's a powerful song about feeling betrayed by the world. And what can I say? I just like it. The album sold well, charting at 23rd in the United States, and Trivium toured extensively to support it. During this process, the band underwent their first lineup change in years. Drummer Travis Smith, the only other founding member aside from Matt, sat out one leg of the tour to deal with personal issues and was substituted by Nick Augusto, a childhood friend of Paolo. However, the band liked working with Nick so much, and given that their relationship with Travis had apparently been deteriorating for quite some time, they decided to make the replacement permanent. Subsequently, Trivium moved forward to release their 5th album, In Waves, in 2011. At a public speaking event organized by Creative Mornings in 2014, heafy described the process of doing the album as a bit of a rebirth for the band, due in no small part to the lineup change. It definitely sounds like one, too. I mentioned earlier that when it came to the Crusade, the band evidently figured that the best way to write a follow-up was to, make it sound incomparable to the one that came before it, and it definitely did the same for In Waves. Whereas Shogun was defined by its complexity, In Waves does away with a lot of the finger-stretching riffs and emphasizes heaviness over everything. I actually used to not like this album because it was so different from Shogun, but I eventually learned to accept the fact that this album slaps. The song most people know from this album is the title track. It has one of the most memorable hook riffs Trivium has ever written, and it's currently the second most listened to song on their Spotify profile. Dusk Dismantled is my personal favorite song on the album. It's absolutely pounding, and it just makes you feel sore after you listen to it. Caustic Are the Ties That Bind has a beautiful, clean interlude in contrast with the heavy verse riffs, which is really nice to listen to. Inception of the End has a chorus that just made me want to sing along with Matt Heafy, which is a bit cheesy, but who cares? Finally, while it's not technically on the album, Drowning in Slow Motion is a killer bonus track that I can't believe didn't make the official track listing. Also, it would be a crime if I didn't mention how awesome the album cover is. Just look at it. In Waves would chart at 13 on the Billboard 200, making it Trivium's highest charting album to this date. In 2013, Trivium entered the studio to record a follow-up. They revealed that they had chosen Disturbed frontman David Dramian to produce the album. That's Disturbed the band. He's not actually mentally disturbed. This is a move that certain fans didn't like. For those who don't know, Disturbed is a metal band who's had mainstream success most metal bands can only dream of. At one point, they had 5 straight albums chart at #1. Their music, while certainly good, is very digestible for people who don't usually listen to heavy metal. They don't take a lot of risks, is what I'm saying. As a result, fans who preferred Trivium's more non-digestible stuff were a little worried about the impact Dramian's presence would have. The band seemed to love him, however. Heafy described him as the most hands-on producer they had ever worked with, and he supposedly helped him gain an extra 4 to 6 notes on his upper vocal range. I don't know much about vocal technique, but that definitely sounds good. Hey guys, it's Robbie. I'm currently editing the video now, and I just realized I never actually mentioned what the album is called. The album is called Vengeance Falls. I don't know why I never mentioned that. So how did the album actually sound? Personally, I had a really good time listening to it. That being said, I do sort of agree with the fans who said that this sounds a little too much like Disturbed. Not stylistically, but it definitely sounds a little polished. There are definitely worse things it could have been, so I'm not gonna hate it too much. My personal favorite song on the album is No Way to Heal. The main riff is irresistibly groovy, and the chorus has some insane harmonies. The title track has an intro that makes you want to headbang, and a chorus you just can't help but sing along to. Incineration, The Broken World, is notable for having a sweet bass solo from Paolo, which really there should be more of. Finally, I just have to mention Strife. It's widely acknowledged as being the standout track from the album, with its pounding verse and soaring chorus. It's definitely cheesy, but I don't care. It's also definitely good. Critically speaking, outlets such as The Guardian and AllMusic praised it for being focused and emphasizing quality over complexity. One review that I found a little interesting was written by Thomas D. Gerhardt of Sputnik Music. In it, he claimed, "Trivium really are the next Metallica, for better or worse." That's definitely a statement. During the touring cycle for this album, 2 big things happened. First off, drummer Nick Augusto was dismissed from the band for what were only ever described as offstage differences. That's code for, this guy drives us up the wall. Apparently he and Paolo's childhood friendship didn't really carry over into adult life. They replaced him with drum tech Matt Madiro, who spells his name with only 1 T for some reason. The second, and more consequential thing, had to do with Matt Heafy and his voice. As I've made clear by now, a big part of Trivium's sound is screaming vocals. Well, as you might expect, doing that requires a very certain vocal technique so as to avoid damaging your throat. Matt, on the other hand, had been using an improper method. 15 years of vocal cord abuse culminated in him blowing his voice in 2014. The group resorted to having Corey take over screaming duties for live performances, and they were unsure if Matt would ever regain the ability to scream. Due to this, when it came time to write and record a new album, they had to do something they hadn't done before: write a whole album entirely with singing vocals. The result was 2016's Silence in the Snow. Silence in the Snow remains a very polarizing record within the fan base, and it's very clear as to why. With no screaming vocals, the band naturally had to adjust their sound, which resulted in an album that's as close to no-frills, straightforward heavy metal as they've ever put out. As a result, a lot of bands dismissed the album as being too clean, too radio-friendly. If I may share my own opinion with the album, I'll admit that when I first gave it a listen in 2017 after having gone through all of their albums before this, I hated this album with a passion. It was so unlike anything they had ever done, and I couldn't believe that a band I had fallen in love with had put out such a dud. Once I calmed down and actually listened to the album, I had to accept that it's pretty good. My main problem with Silence in the Snow is that the songs individually are enjoyable and would work as part of a playlist, but listening to the album from start to finish, you eventually kind of crave something a little more gritty. It also features Pull Me From the Void, which is one of the few Trivium tracks that I can safely say does nothing for me. The album still has quite a few standout songs. The title track has a pounding verse riff and a soaring anthemic chorus. The Ghost That's Haunting You is my personal favorite song on the album, with an infectious hook and a chorus that just makes you want to sing along. Blind Leading to Blind is definitely a little cheesy, but it's the kind of cheesy you can't help but love. For what it's worth, it also has the best music video on the album. Definitely do check it out. Speaking of songs with great music videos, the album's biggest hit is Until the World Goes Cold. It's one of the most radio-friendly songs I've ever put out, but honestly, I don't care. It's a great song, and I'm a sucker for well-written, clean riffs. It remains the third most listened to song on their Spotify profile. Interestingly, the album's instrumental opening track, Snowfall, is entirely composed by Emperor frontman Isan, which is a fun little guest appearance. One thing of note is that Trivium brought back 7-string guitars for the album, which had been absent on In Waves and Vengeance Falls, and they definitely do make this album sound heavy. Critically speaking, the album received what Wikipedia termed generally positive reviews. The Guardian seemed to particularly like it, saying that if they continue down this path, Silence might be remembered as the moment Trivium secured their status as modern metal greats. Well, I think they had already secured such a status, but sure. Spoiler alert, they would not continue down this path. The time following this album was certainly eventful for Trivium. Matt Madiro departed the group and was replaced by Paul Wandtke, who played with them for about a year before himself being replaced by former Brain Drill drummer Alex Bent, which remains the group's most recent lineup change. In addition, Matt regained his ability to scream with the aid of vocal coach Ron Howard. Now that they had no physical barrier keeping them from writing at their full strength, they had to write a new album. On August 1st, 2017, Trivium released a new single titled The Sin and the Sentence. I remember being a 14-year-old lad and listening to it for the first time. I also remember being completely blown away by it. That is an absolutely exhilarating intro, a pounding chorus. Matt definitely regained the ability to scream his lungs out. Listening to it for the first time, I thought, man, I can't wait for a new album. That new album, titled The Sin and the Sentence, would be released on October 20th of that year. The Sin and the Sentence feels like a combination of all of their previous works. It's heavy, melodic, hook-ridden, and complex, without having any of those traits feel overpowering. The addition of Alex Bent certainly adds a whole new element, as his technical prowess makes the drums absolutely pop. Nowhere is this more evident than on the song Betrayer, where his blasting drum beats elevate the song to a whole new level. It got Trivium their only Grammy nomination for Best Metal Performance at the 61st Grammys, where they lost out to High on Fire, and what was a surprisingly stacked nomination field. Fun fact, the 61st Grammys were held in February of 2019, while the album was released in October of 2017. Make it make sense. Other standout tracks include Beyond Oblivion, which has one of the best choruses on the album, with its melodic leads and clean singing from Matt. The Wretchedness Inside is the heaviest song on the album, with an infectiously headbanging groove and insane screaming vocals. The Heart From Your Hate is a clean radio single of the album. It's a catchy melodic song, and it recently became their most listened to song on Spotify. Endless Night is a powerful song about PTSD that, stylistically speaking, could have taken the place of most listened to track. The only thing that kept it from doing so was that it was released as a single 7 months after The Heart From Your Hate. First come, first serve, I guess. All in all, The Sin and the Sentence was considered by critics to be a smashing return to form for the group. Even amongst fans who enjoyed Silence in the Snow, it was satisfying to see Trivium utilizing all of the tools in their arsenal. Outlets praised the album for combining multiple different influences into one cohesive piece. Fans, myself included, were optimistic as to what the future held. Fast forward to the start of 2020, and they began releasing singles for an upcoming album. I remember being a 17-year-old high schooler who, for some reason, refused to listen to the singles since I thought it would be better if I waited to listen to the album as a whole. My wait would come to an end on April 24th of that year when they put out What the Dead Men Say. By this point, my own musical tastes had grown quite a bit, and I was listening to a good deal of non-metal. It was to a point where I was debating whether or not I should even call myself a metalhead. Due to this, I was listening to Trivium a good deal less than I had been in the past, and listening to this album was pretty interesting for me because it was like catching up with an old friend after a long time apart. How did it turn out? Really freaking good. I said at the start of the video that no back-to-back Trivium albums sounded exactly alike. While I still stand by that statement, I'll admit that What the Dead Men Say isn't significantly different from The Sin and the Sentence, with the exception being that it definitely sounds heavier. It's not a bad thing though, since the songs on this album absolutely slap. Catastrophist was the album's lead-off single, and they made the right choice by choosing it. Paolo said in an interview that the people they showed this to gravitated towards it being the single, mainly because of how massive the chorus is. And they were right, since this song feels humongous, for lack of a better word. The title track has irresistibly headbanging riffs, highlighted by a midsection that'll leave your whole neck sore. Amongst the Shadows and the Stones is the heaviest song on the album by far, when it wastes no time at all, immediately kicking into a verse with a pounding drum beat and tortured screaming from Matt. The Defiant is my personal favorite song on the album. It's anthemic, melodic, and honestly sounds like it could have been on Ascendancy. One thing I want to talk about are the lyrics on this album. Paolo wrote an article where he went track by track and explained the inspirations behind them. Some of them are pretty interesting. The title track was named after a short story by Philip K. Dick, writer of The Man in the High Castle and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the latter of which was later adapted into Blade Runner. The story involves a future in which dead people can be revived for a short period of time, albeit one that can be rationed out over long stretches, referred to as a half-life. Paolo says he's not sure if that's exactly what the song is about, but it's what inspired the mindset they were in. Amongst the Shadows and the Stones is criticizing those who profit off war. This would be pretty easy to find out by reading the lyrics, which discuss things like bloody corpses, broken bones, and dying mothers. The Defiant was apparently inspired by watching the documentary Surviving R. Kelly. The band was moved by the fact that all of Kelly's victims had stood together and helped to bring down this massive figure, despite how difficult it must have been to publicly share their trauma. Sickness Unto You was about Matt's experience with having to put his dog down, which coincidentally happened around the same time that his wife was having their twins. Experiencing loss and joy at the same time was obviously a very draining thing to go through, and it makes sense that Matt would want to put pen to paper to express this. What the Dead Men Say received acclaim from critics. Rock and Loud and Wall of Sound gave it a perfect 10 out of 10, which is definitely an opinion. One review I particularly like was written by Megan Langley of Kill Your Stereo, who mentioned that, while having not listened to any of Trivium's prior albums, She enjoyed this one so much that she was excited to jump into their discography. Welcome to the club, Megan. One of the few middling reviews came from Metal Sucks. If there's one thing I hate, it's middling/bad reviews written by people who so clearly just don't like the band to begin with. Obviously, you're not gonna like it. Sorry, got off topic. Trivium was set to go on tour with Lamb of God and Megadeth to support the album. However, due to a certain something that happened in 2020, the tour got cancelled. I had tickets to see them on this tour. No, I'm not over it. The shutting down of everything due to you-know-what meant that the band had a great deal of time on their hands. They used this time wisely, as in a June 2020 interview, only 2 months after What the Dead Men Say came out, Corey mentioned that they were already working on a follow-up. In July of 2021, the band released a new single called In the Court of the Dragon. I remember seeing this news and thinking, damn, already? Indeed, their 10th and most recent album, In the Court of the Dragon, would be released on October 8th, 2021. The aforementioned In the Court of the Dragon is the album's first track, not counting the instrumental intro. It kicks things off with a deafening bang, kicking right into a pounding verse riff that just makes you want to jump, along with powerful screaming vocals from Matt. Like a Sword Over Damocles is my personal favorite song. It has an irresistibly head-banging riff and a catchy sing-along chorus. Alex Bent definitely brings his all on this track, and it makes you wonder just how much coffee they gave the guy. Feast of Fire is their most popular song, and you can see why. The verses have great clean singing and a sick bass playing from Paolo, and the chorus is just smashingly epic. The Shadow of Abattoir starts out with a verse featuring clean, gentle guitar and soft singing. Don't worry, this is no ballad, as we later get killer heavy riffs and a sweet solo. The closing track, The Phalanx, was apparently written originally for Shogun, and the band held onto it for over a decade until they finally wrote an album it would fit on. It makes sense that this is the album they used this for, since this record really feels like a successor to Shogun in terms of overall epicness. This even applies to the artwork, which discards the band name and album title completely, so that all you have to look at is the pseudo-Renaissance artwork. I don't have a tremendous amount to say about this album, since it being their newest and all, it hasn't ingrained itself in my psyche as much. That being said, I would still highly suggest you listen to it. That just about brings us up to now. If Trivium follows the release timeline trend they've been following, then we could expect to hear new updates around, let's say, September of this year. Don't quote me on that, though. If this new album comes out and the current lineup stays the same, then they will have set a record from most albums released with the same lineup. Here's hoping nobody dies. So there you have it. Trivium has definitely released a great deal of music. I'll admit, when I first started working on this script for this video, I had no idea just how much content 10 albums really is. Hopefully I've done an adequate job covering all of them. Now that I've done a fair bit of talking, I want you to do a fair bit of listening. Pick any album that I've just covered, give it a spin, and if you like it, then congratulations, you have a new record to listen to. If not, then hey, at least you tried something new. If you're still watching by now, I just want to say thank you so much for giving me your time. If you like what you saw, be sure to like and hit subscribe. I do these videos whenever I can, and I always have a ton of fun making them. Hopefully you have a ton of fun watching them. If you have an idea for a video you want me to do, leave it in the comments. Who knows, maybe I'll get to it. I'm RobbieJ2734. I will see you when I see you next.